You are walking through a medieval great hall right now. Torches burning low on the walls. Straw spread across the stone floor. 40 people eating, arguing, laughing, sleeping. All within the same four walls. Under the same roof. Breathing the same smoky air. Maybe you are the lord of the manor. Maybe you are a servant. It does not matter. Nobody in that room has a door to close. Nobody has a corner to disappear into. You have never once thought of a closed door as a privilege. But in the medieval world, that is exactly what it was. Privacy, the kind that feels so ordinary to you now, was one of the rarest experiences in the entire medieval world. Rarer than gold, rarer than literacy, rarer than a warm winter. For nearly all of the Middle Ages, the moment you are imagining right now, silence, solitude, a space entirely your own, was not difficult to arrange. It was essentially impossible, and the strangest part is this. The people living inside that great hall, that monastery dormitory, that peasant cottage shared by 10, were not suffering from the absence. They had built something instead, something more sophisticated than walls. So here is the question. What did medieval people actually do with almost zero privacy? For sleep, for grief, for desire, for everything that makes us human? The answer is stranger, more deliberate, and more relevant to your life right now than you are expecting. For nearly the entire span of the Middle Ages, the entire radius of your daily life was a single shared room. That is not a dramatic simplification. In 1987, historian David Herlihy at Harvard University completed an extensive analysis of medieval household records across England, France, and Italy. His finding was striking. The overwhelming majority of medieval people, peasant and noble alike, conducted their entire domestic lives within communal sleeping and eating spaces shared by anywhere from 6 to 50 people. 6 to 50 people in one room. Every night, every gray morning, every argument, every illness, every moment of grief, every intimate moment. There were no separate bedrooms, no private studies, no personal corridors. Even the wealthiest households in Europe had servants sleeping at the foot of the bed, sharing the same fire, breathing the same cold air through the long night. If you wept at night, someone heard. If you were sick, the entire household knew before dawn. If you felt desire, you felt it inside that same room with nowhere to go. And here is the detail that changes everything. This was not the condition of the poor alone. The most powerful barons in England lived this way. The bishops lived this way. The kings of France slept in chambers attended by dozens of servants who never left. No one in the medieval world had privacy the way you understand it. The concept, as you experience it today, did not exist. What they had instead was something far more sophisticated. They built privacy out of agreement, not out of stone or timber, out of a shared and largely unspoken understanding of what people would and would not acknowledge. Medieval communities developed three behaviors so consistent across different regions and centuries that historians now recognize them as a kind of unwritten social architecture. The first was darkness. When candles burned out and the fire dropped to embers, the social rules of the household quietly shifted. Darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was a signal that everyone understood. What happened in darkness was not spoken of in daylight. The night created a boundary that no wall could. The second behavior was physical turning. In communal sleeping arrangements, documented extensively in medieval estate records and monastic regulations, a person who turned away from the group was understood to be withdrawing. No words were needed. The gesture itself carried meaning. In a room with no doors, the direction of your body was your door. You turned. No one followed. That was the rule. The third behavior was the most sophisticated of all. Collective silence. Not the silence of people who did not know. The silence of people who had agreed not to acknowledge what they knew. Historian Barbara Hanawalt, in her landmark study of English peasant life, documented this pattern in detail across coroners' records and manor court rolls. A servant who witnessed something in the night did not report it at breakfast. A wife who heard her neighbor weeping through the shared wall of a cottage did not mention it at the well. Medieval households had no language for privacy because the behavior required no language. It was not written in any rule. It was not enforced by any authority. It was simply understood, the way everyone understands that you do not comment on a man's tears when he does not know you saw them. You did not speak of what you had not seen. And in this way, an entire society created the experience of privacy, without a single wall between them. Darkness, turning, collective silence. 3 behaviors, no materials required. This was the invisible architecture of private life for most of the Middle Ages. Some institutions made it even more deliberate. Monasteries across Europe created what scholars now call structured solitude, scheduled periods of silence where the entire community agreed, at the same moment, to behave as though each person was entirely alone. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century and followed across hundreds of medieval monasteries, codified silence not as punishment but as a shared gift. Everyone gave it to everyone else simultaneously. During the hours of the Great Silence, from Compline at nightfall until the first prayers of morning, a monk could walk through a corridor of 50 brothers and feel as though he walked alone. Not because they ignored him, because they had all agreed, together, to give each other that experience. Privacy was not carved out of stone. It was woven out of collective restraint. The monks had no word for what we would call alone time. What they had instead were dozens of words for different qualities of silence, and they understood each one. Then something began to change. Not suddenly, but slowly. Across the later medieval period, wealth began to reshape space. Around the 12th and 13th centuries, the wealthiest households in England and France began constructing something new. A separate room attached to the Great Hall, called the solar, intended for the lord and his immediate family to withdraw from the communal space. It was not a bedroom in the modern sense. It was a statement, a declaration that separation itself had become a form of power. But here is what almost no one says about that moment. It was not a liberation. It was a fracture. Historian Matthew Johnson at Northwestern University, analyzing the architectural shift in English manor houses across the later Middle Ages, found that the introduction of private withdrawing rooms correlated with a measurable increase in recorded disputes between lords and their households. The shared hall had created accountability. Everyone saw everything. The private solar created distance. And distance, it turned out, created suspicion. The wall gave the lord separation. It also gave his servants something to whisper about. Privacy created the concept of secrets. Secrets meant something was being hidden. And something being hidden had consequences that communal living had never produced. Even as private rooms appeared for the wealthy, the vast majority of medieval people continued living in full communal intimacy well into the 15th century. Travelers shared beds at inns with complete strangers as a matter of ordinary courtesy. Apprentices slept in their masters' workshops. Entire village families shared a single room with their animals through winter for warmth. This was not poverty. This was simply life, as recently as 500 years ago. The private bedroom you wake up in today became a common feature of ordinary life somewhere around 1900. That is the last fraction of recorded human history. And in that fraction, something began happening that medieval people would not have recognized or understood. Today, loneliness is one of the most commonly reported experiences in the developed world. People have more personal space than any humans who have ever lived, and they are more isolated than at any documented point in history. Depression and anxiety climb in every country that has achieved the level of physical separation medieval people never knew. We have entire industries built around helping people feel less alone inside their private rooms. We have therapists and apps and self-help shelves dedicated to the problem of isolation. The walls worked exactly as intended, and something that medieval people carried without effort, the simple and unremarkable knowledge that you were never entirely alone, quietly disappeared inside them. Medieval people had no word for privacy, because privacy was not something they needed to name. What they needed to name were their obligations to one another. Every role, every bond, every duty within the household. Those were the words medieval language had in abundance. We have entire architectural vocabularies for the rooms we build around ourselves. We struggle to name what we feel when we are sitting in them alone. For most of the Middle Ages, people were never truly alone. They found ways to be private without ever being isolated. They built intimacy, not by separating from the group, but by trusting it to look away at the right moment. Then we built walls, and we have been trying to find each other through them ever since.